The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the ice melt in their glasses. 300 guests. 40 years of Everly legacy gleaming in crystal chandeliers, curated floral arches, and the kind of white linen silence only money could command. And then there was me, Claire Everly, the disappointment daughter, standing in a crimson gown that wasn't approved, holding the microphone they never meant for me to touch. My mother blinked once. My father shifted in his chair, the kind of movement that meant this isn't part of the program. But I didn't come to follow a script. The last time I stood in this room, I was being fitted for a wedding dress I didn't choose for a marriage I didn't want. Back then, I didn't say a word. Tonight, I would. Not to wound, not to accuse, just to return something they never expected the truth. But before I speak, before I let these walls hear what they tried to bury, I need to tell you how we got here. Because if you've ever been told to sit down, smile, and let the family protect its image, then maybe you already know what I'm about to say. I grew up in a house where nothing was ever loud except silence. Our home sat on a hill in Brookline, Massachusetts, framed by boxwood hedges and expectations. There were rules about volume posture linens and eye contact, but never about love. Love wasn't a word we used. Approval had better posture. My mother, Lucinda Everly, believed in refinement. She curated people like she did floral arrangements, well-placed, well-lit, never wilting in public. She wasn't cruel, exactly. She just had no use for things she couldn't control. Emotions, questions. Me. My younger sister Nora absorbed her training better. She was gentle, quiet, good at vanishing in plain sight. I used to envy that. I, on the other hand, asked things. Why can't I wear blue instead of cream? Why can't we eat with the staff? Why did Daddy miss Christmas? The answers were always the same, because Everlys don't do that. It took me a long time to understand that Everly wasn't just a name. It was a script. You followed it, or you didn't exist. By 12, I was attending etiquette school on Saturdays. By 15, I could pour tea without a ripple. By 17, I could spot a loose hem on a debutante dress from 20 feet away. What I couldn't spot until it was too late was the cost. You don't notice the price of obedience until your voice has gone missing for so long you forget what it sounded like. My father, Douglas, wasn't cruel either, but he understood investments, and I had been groomed to yield social returns, a Princeton degree, fluent in French, quiet ambition, the kind that fits in heels. Once I told him I wanted to work in fashion, not modeling, but building something. He smiled like I had said I wanted to open a lemonade stand. That's sweet, Claire. But you're an Everly. That was always the ending. Whatever you dreamed, they'd translate it back into who they thought you should be. And for a while, I let them. Until I made the mistake of trying to build something of my own. I was 27 when I finally stepped out of their frame. I didn't scream. I didn't rebel. I simply signed a lease on a narrow storefront on Newberry Street, painted the walls a soft matte gray, and gave it a name, Everly Atelier. It wasn't just a boutique, it was a statement. A quiet refusal. I used my inheritance, what little I had early access to, and paired it with seed money from my father. You'll learn something, he said as he wrote the check. Not encouragement. A warning. The store opened in spring. Our inventory curated pieces from emerging American designers' names no one knew yet but would. I remember the first sale. A woman tried on a copper silk wrap coat and stood taller like she'd remembered herself. I cried in the stockroom. My partner, Mira Carrington, was sharp-driven, socially connected. She'd been introduced through one of my mother's charity friends. Mira handled supplier contracts and vendor accounts. I focused on styling, storytelling, client relationships. 3 months in, we were featured in Boston Interiors. A Vogue editor walked through. We were booked for weeks, and then the invoices didn't match. The bank balance dipped. The accountant called. There's a discrepancy. By the time I arrived at the shop, Mira was gone. Her email deactivated. Her name never existed on the lease. We owed nearly $260,000 to vendors, all in my name. I sat on the shop floor that night and stared at a bolt of emerald silk I had hand-picked 2 weeks earlier. It looked like a flag-waving surrender. The next week, my name appeared in the Globe's business section under the words, "Socialite mismanages funds." The worst part wasn't the headlines. It was the smile my mother wore when I came home. Claire, she sighed. Next time ask for help before you embarrass us. She made it sound like charity. It felt like claws. Within days, the boutique closed. The Everly PR team took control of the narrative. My father reclaimed the lease. My mother held a charity brunch to support young entrepreneurs the same week she locked me out of my condo. They called it a transition. They said they were protecting me. They said, "It's time you accepted your place." And because I had no money, no apartment, no reputation left, I did. But something in me stayed awake, something small and sharp that wouldn't lie flat again. The proposal wasn't made with flowers or a ring. It came in the form of a Tuesday meeting in the formal sitting room. My father sat in his usual leather chair, pretending to read. My mother stood by the fireplace like a judge preparing a verdict. Across from them sat a man I didn't recognize, gray suit, polite hands, and no intention of smiling. "Claire," my mother said, "this is Miles Carter. He's agreed to marry you." I almost laughed. I waited for anyone to say it was a joke. No one did. "You've been given every advantage," my father said, still not looking at me. "This marriage will stabilize the narrative. It will give you structure." Narrative. That was the word they used when truth became inconvenient. "You'll have an apartment," my mother continued, "and a position at Everly Development. It's modest, but it's a start if you're serious about rebuilding." "And if I wasn't, then you'll need to leave this house," she said simply. "With what's yours." Which, Claire, isn't much. They called it an opportunity. But what they meant was obedience or exile. I looked at Miles. He offered a slight nod. Nothing in his posture was cruel, but nothing invited trust either. I turned to my sister Nora, who was standing just beyond the doorframe. Her eyes didn't widen. She already knew. That was the moment that broke me more than anything, realizing this had been in motion for weeks, months maybe. What if I say no? My mother adjusted her bracelet. "Then I hope you've learned how to live without the Everly name." And so, 2 months after losing my business, my home, and the version of myself I had just begun to know, I agreed to marry a man I'd met twice because it was the only option that let me stay warm. And in that moment, I thought the humiliation had finally reached its end. I didn't know it was just the curtain rising. The wedding was held in the back garden of the Everly estate, surrounded by flowers that bloomed on cue and faces that knew better than to look surprised. My dress was simple ivory, no lace, no train, nothing that suggested celebration, only containment. The guest list had been trimmed from 300 to 50, given the circumstances, my mother said. When Miles took my hand at the altar, it was warm, steady, unremarkable, not cruel, not kind. Just practiced. He wore a suit that fit, but barely. His tie was forgettable. His vows were polite. And when the photographer asked for a smile, I gave the one my mother had rehearsed into me since age 6. It held like porcelain. Our wedding gifts were symbolic, practical cookware. 1-year leases, a starter salary. No heirloom silver, no Paris honeymoon, just an apartment and a job at Everly Development front desk entry level, no title. I moved into a 3rd-floor walk-up in South Boston. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, beige everything. Mother had chosen the furniture herself. Neutral tones encouraged reflection. The master bedroom had 2 twin beds. Miles didn't object. He said, "You take whichever side feels less wrong." Every morning he left for work in a Civic. Every evening he returned on-time dinner in hand voice low. He never pried, never raised his voice, never touched me. I once called it a holding cell with polite lighting. He didn't argue, but there were things that didn't sit right. His office small locked always. The calls he took late at night in a tone far too confident for someone in junior consulting. The way he never flinched when I snapped, never indulged my bitterness, never offered false comfort. As if he knew exactly how long the storm would last. One evening, I forgot to take out the trash and cried for 40 minutes over the sound of the lid clicking shut. When I apologized to him out of habit more than guilt, he simply handed me tea and said, "You don't have to earn kindness, Claire. You just have to recognize it." And I remember thinking, who says that? Not a man who married a disgraced socialite out of pity. Not someone who just needed a tax break or family favor. No, something about Miles didn't add up. But at the time, I was too tired to do the math. And maybe that's exactly what they were counting on. By our 3rd month of marriage, I knew something was off. Not just with Miles, with everything. He kept a schedule, but I couldn't trace where he worked. He mentioned clients, but no names. There were no business cards, no water cooler anecdotes. Just silence and expensive cufflinks that didn't match his salary. One night, I opened the wrong drawer in the kitchen and found a receipt for a dinner at the Mayflower Club, a private steakhouse. No one junior could afford it. When I asked him, he just said client meeting. I didn't order the wine. Then there were the names that showed up on our caller ID. Once I caught Gina L., another time Monarch exec office. I looked them up. Nothing came up, which meant everything was being hidden on purpose. But what reason would a man like Miles have to hide his power, not flaunt it? That question sat in my chest like a stone, and it only grew heavier the day I had lunch with Nora. She chose a little cafe far from our old circles. She looked different, simpler, as if she'd started choosing things for herself. We made small talk whether our dog when we were kids, how we both pretended not to hear arguments through the vents. Then she asked quietly, "Did you ever wonder why Mira was never investigated?" My hand froze on the coffee cup. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "You know how thorough our parents are. Background checks references board vetting. But Mira, she just showed up, got access, disappeared." I blinked. So maybe they let her in. Maybe someone made sure she got close. I couldn't breathe for a second. And then Nora said something even colder. "I don't think they just let you fall, Claire. I think they built the floor to break." She didn't stay long after that, but her words did. And suddenly, every silence I'd endured since the boutique started to sound like strategy. It started with the copier breaking. Miles was out. I needed to scan some legal forms for the Everly office, and our home printer had given up. I remembered he had a scanner in his study, his locked study. That day, he'd forgotten to take his keys. I stood at the door for a long moment. Then I opened it. There was no clutter, no mess. Just a minimalist space organized with surgical precision. A steel desk, 2 monitors, 1 leather notebook, and no trace of the man I married. I expected spreadsheets, binders, something boring. What I found, a Bloomberg terminal running in real time. Financial reports for companies I'd only seen in Forbes. A framed photo of Miles with a woman I didn't recognize shaking hands with the Secretary of Commerce. The desk drawer wasn't locked. Inside, a business card. White matte finish unmarked except for 3 embossed letters in platinum foil, MC Carter. I sat down. My hands shook as I typed. MC Carter, Monarch Capital, private equity, worth north of $4.8 billion, founder Miles Carter, reclusive, never photographed, never interviewed, known in investment circles as the Ghost King. My husband, the man who took out our trash and brought home takeout. The man who let me cry in silence without ever offering hollow words. He walked in 30 minutes later and didn't look surprised. I thought it might be today. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Every version of my marriage was collapsing into ash. He sat down across from me, calm. "Claire, I agreed to the marriage under terms." "Yes, but not for charity. Not to fix you." He pushed a file toward me. Inside emails between my mother and her longtime associate, Walter Dean. Payments wired to Mira Carrington 6 months before the boutique opened. Internal memos from Everly PR drafted before the scandal even occurred. "They never believed you could stand on your own," Miles said quietly. "So they made sure you couldn't." I stared at the page. "Why are you showing me this because they thought you'd break? But you didn't. And I don't work with people who only survive. I invest in those who rise. He wasn't here to save me. He was here to show me the floor I fell through was a trap they built, and he thought I could still build something higher. I didn't cry that night. I thought I might. I thought I should. But instead, I slept for 9 hours straight without waking once. The next morning, Miles handed me coffee and a laptop. "You'll need this," he said. "Gina's expecting your call at 10. Gina Lopez, Monarch Capital's strategic director, former Wall Street risk analyst, known for turning failed brands into phoenixes. She greeted me like I already belonged. "You don't need to be an MBA, Claire. You just need to remember the people who said you couldn't, and then prove they never understood what you were capable of. So I learned. I spent mornings in meetings, afternoons in spreadsheets, evenings in case studies. Gina mentored me. Miles challenged me. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't want to fix me, just expected me to show up ready. Meanwhile, we started to gather. Every email, every bank transfer, every forged signature Mira left behind. There were dates, timelines, photographs. Claire Everly. The failure wasn't careless. She'd been targeted, and Nora helped. Quietly at first. She sent archived messages, board minutes, a charity tax filing that showed Mira had once been compensated for consulting work under Lucinda's foundation. The picture sharpened. But this wasn't about vengeance. I wasn't out to destroy anyone. That would mean I still needed to fight for space in their world. No. I wanted something else entirely. To stand in their world, speak in my voice, and let it burn clean on its own. We chose the date carefully, my parents' 40th anniversary gala. 300 guests. The perfect stage. It won't be loud, Miles told me. It'll be surgical. I smiled. For the first time in months, I recognized the person behind it. I wasn't a girl they'd raised. I wasn't a wife they arranged. I wasn't a failure. I was the one holding the truth. And soon I'd hold the mic. The ballroom looked just like it had on my wedding day. Only this time I wasn't standing beside a stranger. I was standing beside myself. 300 guests. The elite of Boston's old families. Champagne and crystal. Laughter rehearsed. My parents stood near the stage basking in curated legacy. Lucinda wore navy, the Everly signature color. Douglas held a glass of scotch like it was a scepter. And I walked in crimson gown, no pearls, no apology. People turned, then turned again. Beside me was Miles, but not the version they knew. This Miles wore a tailored dark suit cufflinks that bore the monarch insignia and the quiet posture of a man no one dared underestimate. The whispers started, then froze when the MC announced, "And now a few words from Claire Everly Carter." My mother's smile cracked just slightly. My father blinked. I stepped onto the stage into the light. The mic felt heavier than it should have. "Thank you for being here." I began, my voice even. "Tonight is about legacy, about what's built and what's buried beneath it." A pause. No music, just air thick with waiting. "I'd like to tell you a story." I unfolded the first document, the Everly Foundation's donation logs. Dates, amounts. Mira's name hidden in plain sight under consultant services. Slide 2 emails between Lucinda and Walter Dean dated months before my boutique opened. Terms like control narrative, manage optics, and post-failure media sequence. The screen behind me lit up with excerpts, quiet gasps, a dropped fork. Slide 3 financial records vendor payments rerouted tax discrepancies, a falsified accusation of mismanagement. "I wasn't a failure," I said quietly. "I was a strategy." Lucinda stepped forward. "Claire, that's enough." I turned to her, voice calm. "You once told me Everlys don't air family issues in public. But you made me the issue. You turned my name into a cautionary tale before I ever had a chance to speak." Then came the final slide, a formal press release announcing a new business clarity studio, an independent fashion incubator funded not by family but by Monarch Capital. I let it linger, then, one last twist, Miles stepped forward, not as my husband but as MC Carter founder and CEO. Half the room sat back, a few stood. My father's expression shifted from confusion to something close to fear. I looked out into the crowd and saw Nora. She wasn't seated near our parents. She had walked forward. She stood at the base of the stage alone. She gave one small nod. And that was it. No screaming, no blame, no spectacle. Just a shift in gravity that pulled the lies from their pedestal. Later that night, someone asked me how I stayed so composed. I smiled, soft and tired. When you've spent your life being told you don't belong in the spotlight, you learn how to make the truth shine even brighter. The apartment is smaller now. Mine. There's no staff, no curated silence, just hardwood floors and morning light that doesn't ask for permission. I painted the walls clay blue, the opposite of Everly cream. Miles and I still live together, but not as husband and wife in the traditional sense. We built something different. No titles, no script, just trust that didn't need to be performed. Clarity Studio opened last fall. We started with 3 designers, all women rejected from their former firms for being unmarketable. 2 have already launched collections. They thank me. I tell them don't, just build. Nora visits sometimes. She brings old photos, never stays too long. We don't speak about Lucinda or Douglas much. Their name still echoes in some rooms, but not in mine. I've learned that healing doesn't always look like reconnection. Sometimes it's a locked door you choose never to open again. Last week I walked past the Everly estate. The hedges were taller, the curtains drawn. The world still believes in their myth. But I don't, because I know what it cost, and more importantly, I know what it didn't buy back. Tonight someone asked if I'd ever forgive them. I just looked out the window and said, they'll never know what it's like to hear your own voice and realize it's the first time it doesn't tremble. If you've ever been handed a version of your life that didn't sound like your own voice, just leave a dot.